Hello, everyone, and welcome to our 3:30 session, Calm During the Storm. We are with Lincoln Snyder, who's the Executive Director of Schools in the Diocese of Sacramento. He is a very accomplished superintendent, very innovative, and we're so excited to have him here with us today. In addition to being a LEAD, Learn, Proclaim award winner for the work he has done in managing the crisis in California after the wildfires, he is accomplished in many areas. So please check out his bio and feel free to connect with him via the People tab if you want to continue to ask questions and talk with him after the session today. We are being recorded, and you are very encouraged to come back and view the session or recommend it to a colleague. Please utilize the chat and the Q&A to communicate with Lincoln and each other to ask questions. So Lincoln, without further ado, thank you for being here.
Well, thank you so much. Good to be here. So happy Saturday, everybody. And I am here today to talk about crisis management during COVID. So I'm going to share the screen, and without further ado, get started. So just a bit about myself. I am superintendent of schools for the Diocese of Sacramento. We're a medium-sized diocese by the standards of our state, at least. So we have 44 Catholic schools with a total enrollment of around 13,000. One unique thing about our diocese is it covers 11 different counties, and so that will come up during the presentation. But so we have a large territory and a nice long legacy of Catholic education here. We've been in business since 1859, which is means we have the oldest school west of the Mississippi River, oldest Catholic school west of the Mississippi River here in our diocese. So without further ado, I wanted to talk about what it was like managing through COVID over this past year and lessons I've learned, and then would just be happy to answer any questions you may have. So that's we'll go. So one thing we talk a lot about in our diocese here are virtues. We have a program for our K through 8 schools called Education and Virtue, and so over the last several years we've all learned about the cardinal virtues of temperance, prudence, fortitude, and justice. The whole point of virtue is developing habits that are going to let you lead a balanced life, and if there were ever a time that we needed virtues and habits to fall back on, it was this past year managing through COVID. Really, life has thrown us a lot of curveballs this year, and it's called for a lot of reflection, a lot of restraint, a lot of balance, and a lot of informed decisions. And so there's one virtue in particular that I really wanted to praise our team for this year, and that's valor, which is defined as great courage in the face of danger, especially in battle. I just finished rereading the book, The Iliad, and one of the things they talk about is this Greek word aristeia, which is a moment of valor. So that's when you're called to really rise above, and in that one moment, really be excellent and be your most valorous self. I really feel like our schools certainly have been valorous in their response to COVID over the past 12 months. So our team did a lot to make sure that we were staying in session, that we were accommodating every student. So during this presentation, I'm going to talk a lot about all of these things we did to manage in the face of the immediate crisis when it all started off, and then figure out how to manage in this new environment of COVID-19 for the long haul for this school year. But I mean, I think through it all, everybody has gone above and beyond and just literally worn themselves out, staying ahead of things. And so my boss, the Vicar General, has joked about a lot, but he just says that, this year you've had to be the guy at the end of 1917 running down the field to deliver that letter. And so as I go through this presentation, the refrain that I keep hearing in my head, and then every time something new would come up, he would say to me, one more letter to deliver. And so it's been quite the experience. And actually, the important thing about making that mad dash, you've all heard the reference about, you want to be a duck in the water, which means that no matter how furiously you're pedaling beneath the water, you want to look calm on the outside for everyone else. And so, we've all had that sensation of one more letter to deliver as we're running down the battlefield, but always remembering that for everybody that is looking to us for leadership, and that's as superintendents, as principals, and as teachers, that no matter how fast those legs are moving, we still want to look like we're the duck. So this is actually a really interesting weekend to be giving this presentation, because really a turning point for us was this same weekend in March of 2020. This is the weekend in which we do Academic Decathlon for Sacramento. And it was 1 year ago today, to the day, that we were in the gym of one of our Catholic high schools, Jesuit High School, and got the news that the largest public district in the area was going to be closing for a week preemptively out of concern for COVID. They hadn't had a case. They had a storm brewing. That we had a superintendent's retreat in February for all the Catholic superintendents, and we had posed the question, wouldn't it be wild if we had to close our schools for a bit because of COVID-19? Well, on March 7th, 2020, the first big public district, Elk Grove Unified, decided to call it. They announced a one-week preemptive closure one day to the next, and really kind of sent everybody else into a panic. The principals of our schools were all on site at this competition, so I was actually pretty lucky in that I could bring everybody together physically on the spot and deliver the message, get ready. We knew that we were on the same trajectory as Elk Grove Unified, and that we needed to get ready as soon as possible. I also knew that we had the capacity to shift into distance learning rather than simply close outright the way Elk Grove had. The other superintendents and I had talked about this, and one of the things we said was, well, we've got to keep teaching kids. There is the ability to do it via distance. It's not going to be perfect, but making sure that we're guaranteeing that continuity of service one day to the next is going to buy us a lot in the eyes of our community, even if we don't get it right on that first day. So we'd already committed to doing that. We're not going to just close school. We're not going to stop anything. The decision we're making is not to be open or to close, but are we going to be on campus or via distance? And we had exactly 1 week to really batten down the hatches and prepare for that. One thing that was really clear to me during that first week is that people really wanted leadership. I've got a picture here of the Doctor from Doctor Who, favorite show, I'll confess. One of the things that the Doctor generally does is he's dropped into a situation that is completely chaotic. The people don't know him, he doesn't know them, but he invariably makes the decision to step up and lead because people are looking for answers. And it felt like that. There was a complete vacuum of information, and more importantly, a vision on the part of the broader public authorities. So it was clear to me that no one else knew what they were doing, which means that it's a really great time to start making decisions. So we pulled the team together and planned for the worst case, which was not being able to be open precisely 1 week from that first closure. And we started working toward that date. And I think you'll all recall a lot of rumors everywhere across the country, what's going to happen, what's going to happen. I started up a daily memo immediately to start republishing any information I could get. And, you know, I'd be up at 4 in the morning, pull together the day's news, and push it out by 8 a.m. daily. And that was for the principals, just so they didn't have to be the ones digesting the information. A lot of them shared those memos with their broader community, which was fine. I also started putting out parent letters and videos more or less immediately. It was a chaotic time, and I felt it was really important to let people what we know and let them know what we don't know. Donald Rumsfeld, who was the Secretary of Defense under Bush, the second President Bush, talked about known knowns, known unknowns, and unknown unknowns. And I felt it was really important to separate those for ourselves, but then also communicate them to the community as well. What I learned through that is that it was important that I create an expectation of how I was going to behave in the uncertain environment. Even if the world was unstable, I didn't have to be. And even that expectation of what I was going to do provided an anchor for the community, even though the broader environment was extremely chaotic. I did have to step up and become the public face of the organization for that time. You know, I feel very strongly, and I'll talk about this in a couple of slides. You know, people have the relationship with their teacher and with their principal, and the superintendent is the person behind the curtains that makes things happen for everyone else, and she or he doesn't need to be the public face. For this initial period, I really was, because we were making a lot of decisions very quickly through the main office. It was really the opposite of the culture of Catholic schools for most dioceses, but people accepted that. I think one reason they accepted it is that we were working very hard to get ahead of expectations. I really wanted to communicate that we were doing everything we could to keep the initiative. And by doing that, we kept the trust of the community. I also kept the trust of my bosses. They saw that we were all killing ourselves to stay ahead of it. They let us run. And so it was a really important time for us. And one of the funniest things or one of the biggest, funniest points of positive feedback we got, when you're doing it right, when parents start making memes about you that are positive instead of negative. And so when we made that first transition, I think there really was this heady sensation on the part of the community that, okay, we're all getting this done together. So when I got a profane Big Bird meme from a school parent that ended up going viral, I knew that we had done something right. People wanted to identify with the effort, which was huge. So those first 3 months of COVID really did feel like a year. They were wild. We're making snap decisions about all sorts of things. What standards are we going to use for distance learning? Is it okay to do paper packets, or does it have to be a synchronous learning every single day? What do we do about schools that don't have communities with quality internet in the home or with their own tech? And how do we reframe community events for everybody when we're not able to come together? My goal was just to call it and do everything we needed to do to keep the kids supported through this. Hey, if kids needed devices, we sent them home, no questions asked. We were willing to take the risk of stuff walking off and disappearing. The public authorities weren't much help. Of course, they were facing a very different set of circumstances, but it was very clear early on that they weren't looking for reasons to come back. And though I started off having conversations with public school superintendents at the same time that the mayor was calling us all in for conversations here in Sacramento, they were just going down a different path, the different dialogues. So we made the decision to focus on ourselves. Of course, being in conversation with public health, but by being in person and making all these other decisions, we had already put ourselves on a different track. So I stayed in front of the community. I mean, through letters, through videos. I was doing a lot of carbon copy, all memoranda that were coming out from my desk daily. I found that I had to build my own team of experts. So I found an epidemiologist, a virologist, a city first responder manager that were willing to work with me. And then we worked with other Catholic superintendents as well across diocesan lines just to see what everybody was doing to respond. A few key lessons that I learned from this is we didn't wait for someone to tell us what we should be doing. We just went out and did it. Of course, in doing that, I was always really aware of what the downside risk was, that people could get sick if we weren't careful. But we weren't waiting for somebody to tell us what was doable or what wasn't doable until they did. And so we knew that in structuring all of this, there were some things that were just completely unacceptable for us. One of them would have been not being a daily presence in the lives of our kids in our community. Of course, we wanted to come back as quickly as possible, but we realized that at least for the rest of the school year, we were going to be committed to offering daily online presence plus community events where we could. So, and I put up a picture here, but there's a great scene in the movie, Saving Private Ryan, that makes me think of the summer after that first sprint. Where they've already been through so much and there's another big battle coming, and so they have this wonderful little pause listening to a phonograph and talking through things before they know that invariably the battle's going to start again. We worked really hard. I worked really hard. Again, I was up at every day 3:30, 4 o'clock for months straight, staying ahead of the information flow and staying on top of communication. And for any leader, there's always that risk of burning out when you're pushing it that hard, but I simply knew it wasn't going to be an option to take a breather before we got to summer. So I was working toward June 1st as my breathing point. And already in May, while everybody was just doing their best to make it across the finish line of the school year, I had started working on what was going to happen when school came back. And so I knew that the environment was driving a lot of our workflow at that point. We had to get through the end of the school year. We had to get to summer. We had to get the breathing point where we could really take more time to look deep and say, okay, what's August going to look like? I even tailored my vacation to those circumstances. I took a break, not Not any earlier or later than I should have to manage COVID. I just took it when I could, right in the middle of June. And I just wanted to, it's funny, I was going through this, let me exit out of this, just to show you the kinds of things we're working on. In March, this is what my memos look like. Bullet pointed, laying out policies, thoughts, dates, updates on fundraisers, any question that anybody had, I figured might be valuable for everyone, so in one in the daily memo, and we answered it. By May of 2020, we were already saying, okay, what could our return to school look like? And so this was the big product and expectation we had in place before everybody went off for summer break. How we're going to manage next year. Again, I felt it was really important before everybody headed home that we had a plan in place to create an expectation of what the next school year was going to look like. It was 25 pages long, had everything from path of travel to signage. It was not done in response to any public entity's suggested plan for us. It was simply done in good faith in collaboration with our advisors, and we wrote it and put it on the website, got it out to everybody. Okay, here's our idea of what next year is going to look like. Again, I felt it was important for us to be ahead of it. I thought it was important to build confidence because they could see we're being thoughtful and transparent about what we couldn't expect for the next school year. And the next school year, this school year, we knew was going to be the long haul. So if you think of that first spring as a battle, we knew that this year was going to be a campaign. I made a couple of really deliberate decisions about my own leadership. I had been a much more visible presence directly in the lives of our parents during that first spring, where I was putting out memoranda and videos and parent letters. I felt very strongly that principals needed to return to being the public face of the school. I wanted them to be the ones that were owning the decisions and leading their own communities. So I moved from my daily memos to a weekly Zoom call with the principals. I wanted to put as much of the communication with the community back in their hands as possible. I also knew that just in terms of my own time management, I was going to have to spend my time managing our infrastructure behind the scenes, i.e. being a superintendent. And the public health situation was evolving. I had to develop a relationship with 11 different county health officers in their offices to make sure that we were operating according to their expectations. They're the ones that could keep us open or shut us down. The state continued to update its own expectations of what the return to school could look like. Just by way of comparison of what we were trying to do versus what their rate of changing expectations was, we're now on version 9.1 of our return to school plan. I published that first one in May. That means that once a month, the state of California has forced us to fundamentally, or in at least significant a way enough to change the version, update our plans. So a lot of my job has become being a public health officer or a lobbyist. Add it to the job description. My role really was advocacy and management of things behind the scenes. It was really important for me to have my science together. Again, we wrote one master return to school plan for all of our schools across 11 counties, but then I started negotiating. Medical science is unique in that doctors have different opinions. A lot of the work is clinical and not lab work, and we didn't have a lot of data and they didn't have a lot of data to go on it. It was anybody's best presumption and not best guess. We were presuming based on science, but at the end of the day, we still had to negotiate county by county with what they were going to let us do and not do in our return to school. And the state kept throwing us curveballs as well. So they came up here in California with a waiver program where we had to apply for a waiver to come back to school in most of our counties. And they had a plan and they changed it and they changed it again. By September, we had all of our elementary schools back in session in person in all counties. And it was a really complicated process. So that 25-page document I referred to became 50. But we got through it. Another point of concern was our high schools. We have a bell rotation at high schools. Our strategy for keeping kids safe was based on cohorts, and we couldn't get our high schoolers into cohorts, small stable groups, without changing the program so much that it wouldn't be effective. So we looked for other ways to get it done. By October, we had figured out how to do antigen screening, i.e. screening students using these antigen kits for COVID before they came on campus, and that allowed us to operate with a bell rotation while still mitigating COVID as best we could. It was an opportunity and we grabbed it. And actually, by jumping into that program, people were skeptical at first, but the state of California officially recommended it in January for all schools. So we were ahead of the curve again on that one. So we found ourselves layering on protections and strategies as COVID got worse again going into winter. We knew that Thanksgiving and then Christmas could really provide a double bump, and they did. We believed the predictions, and so when they said, hey, the holidays are going to be nasty, I took that to be the truth. So again, we led with antigen screening. We made it work for our high schools. We piloted it with middle schools. And we developed questionnaires to ask families, it's okay, have you done the following things like travel out of state or be in big groups? So when they came back from the holidays, if they had, we asked them to stay in distance mode. All of this added up to us having actually a very controlled environment when it comes to COVID. We ran over 2,100 COVID tests on that first Sunday before the return from the Christmas break, and we had 9 positives across 7 schools. And those people didn't come onto campus. And so we were able to really control for the safety of our environment by really thinking through deliberately about these strategies. The authorities themselves were really more a distraction than a help, for what that's worth. Not that they didn't help somewhat. So some counties gave us COVID screening kits, for example, but at the end of the day, we had to call a lot of audibles. We had to spend a lot of money we hadn't budgeted for. Doing the antigen screening was costing us $50,000 a weekend in total across all schools. But I certainly felt that that was a lot cheaper than having people get sick and potentially losing families because they're concerned about the safety of our environment. So managing through all of these decisions we had to make, and in negotiating with the public entities, my focus really was understanding our risks and then making sure that we were sticking to the science first. As long as we stuck to the science, I knew that we always had an argument for doing what we wanted to do. Also understanding that our goal was to stay in person and not move back to distance learning. So as we've gone through the winter, and the vaccine came on the horizon, we started working toward an end game. And one of my dad's favorite expressions is, there's a light at the end of the tunnel and it's not a train. No train in this photograph. So I can't emphasize how important it is to know what your end game really is. Not that we understood it completely when we started the year, but when the vaccines did come on the horizon, I made a really deliberate decision to work toward that as something that we could call the end game, the end of a phase. I had a really good basic reason for this. I knew that once all of our teachers were vaccinated, no one was going to die on my watch. And I can't emphasize enough how much clarity that gave me in terms of what I was managing toward. I was working towards something that was definable, it was objective, and it had a lot of simple, basic underlying meaning. Kids, for the most part, don't experience COVID in a severe way, not that there isn't risk, and vaccinated adults don't die of it. So I knew that that was one way we could really have a baseline guarantee of safety for our communities that would free us up to look at more things going forward. It's been very political here in Northern California. I'm sure it has in other areas as well. The availability of vaccines was a hotly debated point. Some counties got us in January. Other ones really didn't know what to do. Some even were working against the governor's directive to vaccinate teachers. They didn't want to vaccinate teachers. So again, I found myself in very much the lobbyist and public advocate role. This was a lot of my work over the first 6 weeks of the school year. Of the calendar year, rather, coming back from Christmas. The good news is that in working toward a really clear goal and putting my time and energy behind that, we were able to get everybody vaccinated in the first week it was possible in each of the counties. Going through the front door, we didn't have to jump any lines to do that. I just really made sure that our ducks were in a row, so when a county opened up the tier to vaccinate teachers, we were able to get that done in a fair and transparent way. Again, we jumped no lines, we were ahead of no dates, but I made sure we weren't losing any time once the door was open to vaccination. The funniest lesson about this is February 16th here in Sacramento, we had a big vaccination clinic, got most of our staff in this county through that clinic and another clinic that ran the following day. which felt like a major achievement to me. We had 2 media challenges that had nothing to do with COVID the very next day. And so, as I met with my boss, the bishop, I joked with him that, well, glad I'm yesterday's hero. Of course, tomorrow is always going to present its challenges, but again, we knew that act of getting everybody vaccinated was our commonly understood baseline for saying, okay, we made it through this stage. So to sum up, what were the lessons I learned about leadership from managing through the last year? One is that it's really important to have a lodestar that keeps you centered. Ideally, you're going to have a hero who can set a moral frame of reference for your behavior. My mom always teased me that, well, this is your Churchill moment, managing through this year. And it's actually not a bad analogy, because you can step back and look at somebody that really has proven their chops, and history's got thousands of them, in critical situations, and ask yourself, whoever the person you identify with is, what are the basic tenets they're giving you, and how would you manage, or how would they manage in your shoes? So I did a lot of meditation on that point as I made decisions. The other one was just a practical one, to get a feel for, was I doing the right thing? And I asked this question of myself continuously: am I creating momentum with what I am doing? You can't create momentum with every decision, but as we were managing through the worst of it, I really wanted to make sure that my time was spent on things that were creating a sense of momentum around our organization, getting us through the challenge. This is related to the next point, which is staying ahead of expectations. This is not the same thing as knowing what you're doing. Right? So none of us are clairvoyant. It's hard to predict the future. We were operating in a very uncertain environment. But again, it was clear to me that if I could stay ahead of the message, stay on top of the information, really communicate that I was working hard to stay ahead of it, and sometimes getting those wins where we were ahead of it, it really built confidence in what we were doing in terms of managing through the crisis. In this spirit, for example, I'm working on a return to normal plan. So we went through 9 versions of a return to school plan. And again, last May, we published a document laying out our vision for how we were going to manage COVID during the current school year. I'm going to repeat that. My goal is by April to have a return to normal plan, where we're going to lay out an expectation for how we're going to be dialing back all of these COVID strategies for next school year. I think it's going to be really important for retention, for building confidence with our communities. Again, giving people something to work toward, despite all the uncertainties. Could something pop up and change our plans? Absolutely. But all things being even, knowing what we know today, can I lay out a broad vision for what next year is going to be like in our schools? Absolutely. So why not publish it? The next note is not directly related to too much what I've said before, but it is really important to remember that people don't bend, they break. And self-care, I think, for a lot of leaders in the middle of a crisis isn't really something that comes to the front of the line for them. But certainly caring for my team's been important. It doesn't mean that I was trying to govern by consent 100% of the time, or spent too much time trying to keep everybody happy all the time. But it did mean that I knew that a lot of my folks were really coming close to breaking at a number of points, and making sure that I stayed on top of that in terms of communication with them was really important to me. It's been a very stressful year, and again, working toward that time when things could feel a little bit normal is really important to support them in doing. It's also important not to lose your sense of humor. And back to the Big Bird meme. This has been a very stressful year. Everybody's been anxious and maybe not quite their best self at times for a whole lot of reasons, but making sure that you remain self-aware of that and keep your sense of humor is incredibly important. Finally, it's important to figure out what victory is going to feel like. Otherwise, you're not going to know when you're done. And this is back to vaccinations and getting everybody vaccinated being my end of that particular campaign. It was definable, and I knew that once I got there, I would be able to say, okay, major achievement, now we can reset, reframe. Mission creep's a real thing. It's really important to stay focused on those broader goals. Doesn't mean that the goals can't change as the world changes. There's a great quote that thinking is just a fancy word for changing your mind. sometimes things will pop up and you'll have to reframe. So I'm creating a return to normal plan that presumes that these new variants of COVID aren't going to be particularly deadly for kids. If they are, that means we're going to have to change our strategy. But again, we're working on the best information we've got. But my presumption is people understand that it's okay. Well, we're working toward a clear goal, and we're looking forward to telling you when we've achieved it. Doesn't mean that things couldn't change, but if they do, we'll let you know at that point. Not the same thing as making excuses. Now, it's finally just ending with a quote. Being decent and kind through all of this has been very important to me personally. I feel that our communities are stressed enough just trying to manage through the challenges of the current year. People have lost jobs. People have had to take on new roles in their kids' education that perhaps they didn't feel prepared for. It's been stressful for everyone. We're not in community the way that we would like to be. I think it's called for an extra level of kindness as we think about, okay, how are we going to come back together in community and make sure that we do have a sense of what normal could feel like once this is all done. So that's my presentation on COVID, and I'd be happy to open the floor to questions.
Sure. As people start answering questions, so you can do that in the chat or the Q&A. I'll start reading those out to Lincoln. But in the meantime, while we're waiting for people to have a moment to catch up and input their questions, I'm wondering, if you saw that there was a large increase in turnover or retirements or things like that in as far as faculty retention during this time.
It has actually. Yes, it was a little bit above average, but it was not as noticeable as we feared it would be. We did have some folks who were veterans choose to retire at the beginning of the year. But in terms of overall numbers, it was not dramatic. We know that we've asked a lot of our teams this year, and we've tried to be humble about that. I think that, again, making sure we're staying ahead of it with our teammates and asking them those retention questions. Okay, are you getting close to burnout? Are there different ways we can support you? Can we change things to not overwhelm you? We've dialed back a lot of our PD, for example, this year, and expectations around some major programs we had going. We were in the process of moving to standards reference assessment, and it was clear to us we weren't going to be able to ask our teachers to spend hours and hours developing critical concepts this year for standards reference grading when we're asking them to also teach two different groups of kids at the same time in the classroom, the in-person and the at-home learners. So I really made it clear that our expectations have changed and they didn't have to get an A+ on everything they were doing before, plus address the new challenges. Hopefully that'll keep people with us. We want them to feel acknowledged and appreciated in all the stress that they've been facing.
I think that, with all the stress the teachers are facing, the leaders must be facing, just as much, if not more, and managing all those different, groups of people they're caring for. How have your school leaders or has the diocese handled teacher evaluation this year? Have you let that go? Have you adapted it? What have you done there?
We've adapted it and made it really simple. So we really are asking the essential questions about performance for our principals and our teachers. And so we really did go to a simplified observation form just so it wouldn't feel quite as overwhelming as the normal clinical observation and evaluation process would be. We understand that especially in a year when everybody's teaching differently than they normally would, the old rubric wasn't going to work anyway. So we really pared down the evaluation to those essential questions about what makes for success and commitment.
Lincoln, I've known you for a while now, and you have a reputation for just sort of being ahead of the curve as far as in your quick and decision making. You're decisive and successful many times. What would you say to leaders who maybe who are new in the position of superintendent or even in school leadership in regard to sort of making some of those courageous calls? I know that's not an easy thing to do, and I'm sure along the way you've made some stumbles that you've had to course correct. So what advice do you have for leaders there?
There's actually a great quote from Doctor Who where the doctor finds a woman who's alone on a gunship that's crashing, and he says, well, who put you in charge? And she said, well, everybody else was screaming. I think that the important thing to remember is that you have to be willing to make a decision, and it doesn't have to be a perfect decision because you can always make another decision. But sometimes all of the choices you face are bad ones and you still have to choose. one of the things that I've learned through life is cultivating the capacity to be comfortable with the least bad choice rather than being comfortable with the best choice. And that is a real shift of mindset, I think, for a lot of folks. But it's really, really critical. I mean, the Army teaches it, and I went to the School of Foreign Service. They teach it in diplomacy. So that level of comfort with the least bad decision, but making a choice, once you understand what your options are, is critical. Again, people don't expect perfection. They don't even expect you to know everything, but they do expect you to be the one that's willing to step up and make the decision, because they can anchor their expectations to that.
We have another question in the chat. What is the most surprising positive that came out of this past year with all these COVID-related disruptions?
I think that the teachers stepping up and doing dual delivery and watching with the grace with which they handled that was really tremendous. We've had these big projects cooking for the team, and like standards reference assessment again, or all of our formation around the virtues program that have taken a lot of learning on the point of our teachers, and I think that understanding that we could just jump in with both feet and get it right, and have that acknowledged by the parents in a really graceful way, I think was a really strong affirmation for our teams. Community looks a little bit different when we can't all be in the same room together, but I saw the way that the parents gave us feedback, not that everybody was happy all the time, but they were happy to see us doing everything we could for their kids. When we moved to the antigen screening program, we were doing 2,100 screens per weekend for those first 3 weeks back. And I worked every single car line as the parents came through. And I really believe the gratitude they were expressing to me was sincere. They knew that we wanted to keep their kids safe and keep their kids learning. And we were doing our best to balance those two things. So I do feel like the community certainly had our backs as we were working through all these choices. And that was, of course, there's always the naysayers out there, but just seeing how big that silent majority of people that really were supportive was very affirmational for me.
Did you have existing relationships with the county? I mean, you did a lot of sort of collaborative things, with county and the health department and first responders. Did those relationships, were they pre-existing, or did you develop them quickly? How did you work all that out?
I had to develop them pretty quickly. I had a few political relationships, not on the public health side, but like with county supervisors, for example. The Catholic communities tend to have people who are connected or movers and shakers. And so all of that networking I had done through my job over the years really did pay off, because I had relationships with people who could advocate for us. But a lot of it really was just putting in the time to get to know the county health officers, who are very much behind the scenes, people that suddenly had to step forward and take on very public roles. They've had very difficult jobs. Half of the health officers I was working with in March of 2020 are no longer in the job. Mm. And so it's a high pressure, high stress, high burnout decision. And the more I learned I could understand the issues and bring them a question with a solution and a proposal before I came to ask them their opinion, the easier it was for me to get things done. So again, that's where, I've got a degree in foreign policy processes. I was not trained in health, but the more I could take things off their plate, the more I learned it was going to be a successful relationship.
So one final question here, how did you manage Catholic identity? You mentioned community, which is so important and has been difficult to maintain, but it sounds like you've done some really tangible things in regard to community. How did you address, Catholic identity or communities of faith throughout this crisis?
Some of it was intentional and some of it was grace. One of the things that happened during the first 3 months of COVID is we had actually a music teacher at one of our schools stepped up and became our in-house psalmist. He recorded a new psalm every single day to unique music. And so we were able to push out literally something explicitly religious that was unique to us because of his gift. And so that he really became the, our in-house cantor. And so we were, during those first crazy months, every single memo began with a psalm that was created that day just for us. And that I think really anchored everybody to the faith really quickly on that front. A lot of the memos I put out, of course, we always led with faith in the messaging and community. We even took our tagline and reformulated it during COVID. We now say faith, community, growth are our three objectives as the Catholic School Department. And I just created very explicit expectations around, okay, school's going to be different for the next year, year and a half. But if you look at our really what's essential about Catholic education, it's faith, it's community, and then it's growth. We could demonstrate that we were moving the ball in all three of those categories, despite the fact that it was such an uncertain environment.
Well, I know you're a busy man, so, and it sounds like you have a lot of things cooking and your academic decathlon is going on at the moment as we're speaking. So thank you for taking time out to be with our attendees and to share your leadership. As always, you're so generous with that, and I appreciate it. If you have additional questions for Lincoln, you can reach out to him. You can connect with him in the People tab. You can find him on Twitter. He's very accessible. And I hope, Lincoln, that we'll hear from you more at the Presidio Project. We're really just so blessed with this relationship. So thank you for being here.
Thank you. Anytime. It's been my pleasure.
Have a great weekend.
God bless.